we've got a new companion Niv deck. Now, for those of you who don't know or have seen it before, I don't know if I ever made the tech on it. One of the decks I tried to make with Omri the Collector, because we have to make an all-creature deck, obviously with this companion's restriction, is all spells must share a type. So obviously the restriction commander is, if you want this as your companion, your commander instantly forces the restriction down the way of either creature or potentially planeswalker or artifact, if you could do it that way. But you also have to have these colors. So since we are restricted by creature, we originally tried a tribal deck, but after playing against it and playing against the optimized tribal, I realized it just wasn't very good. So I decided to go back and take on my most hated mechanic. And you may ask, what is my most hated mechanic? It is Party. And I'll give you a quick history rundown. Party was introduced in Zendikar Rising, and we'll go over it when we get to it. But it was basically, you had to have 4 different types of creatures for an adventuring party. It removed the old ally mechanic, which was honestly my favourite. It was the first commander deck I built entirely from scratch, with stuff I traded and opened when I started playing. And it was my first Brood Modern deck, where I made a hardened scales 5 color allies list, which I loved. It went 3-1, I think was my best run with it on my Friday Night Magics when I used to play in the city. And I've loved the mechanic for ages, and they replaced it with Party, and I gave Party a pass because I assumed they're setting up for Dungeons and Dragons. And we didn't get a single party-based thing until the Commander Legends Baldur's Gate, which was a year after. So, let's start with our companion here. Omri the Collector. It is when it enters the battlefield, we choose a card type, and spells of that card type cost 1 less to cast. So, spoiler alert, we're going to choose creatures. We have no synergies in the way of straight up breaking Omri. We are just going to use it for value. So, our ramp package has to be changed here, so we're running a ton of creatures. So here, Sylvan Ranger gets us a basic land. Flourish Vine Wolf digs top 6, gives us a basic land we find. Dryad Greenskeeper, Bloom Tender, Super Dork. Basically, this is Gigantha without the restriction. Noble Hierarch, Ignoble Hierarch, Elves of Deep Shadow, Birds of Paradise, and Avacyn's Pilgrim. Obviously, because we're restricted to creatures only, we can't run any of our regular ramp spells. Now, aside from our usual split of all the creatures, we have our party payoffs. And you may notice there's only 5 of them, because there's not much support for party in creatures only, so we lean more into the having 1 of every kind and using their natural strengths for it, and we'll go over them as we see. So here is our first payoff. Is the squad commander. When it enters the battlefield, we make a 1/1 call warrior for each creature in our party. Our party consists of cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. At the beginning of combat on our turn, if we have a full party, creatures we control get +1 per soul and indestructible. Really solid if you have a full party, but obviously not as solid if you don't. In blue, we have the Nimble Trapfinder. It can't be blocked if you had another, basically, creature in this deck enter the battlefield under your turn. At the beginning of combat on your turn, basically our creatures gain, if they deal combat damage, we draw a card. Every creature we gains that, which is very good. Malachir Blood Priest. When it enters the battlefield, we drain each opponent for X, and we gain X, where X is the number of creatures in our party. Then we have the Thundering Spark Mage, which does damage equals the number of creatures in our party. And the Ardent Electromancer, which adds a red for each creature in our party. Now we'll go over these. Basically, there was no good green payoff in these colours. So ignoring this, we'll go into our colours and show each example. So in Azorius, we have our first wizard, Kifkin. We have Mistmetal Witch, which can blink our creatures, so we can blink some of our payoff creatures or other things, or blink our opponent's creatures. We have Geist of St. Traft, because this is apparently a cleric, and it's really solid, and I've never noticed how sick that art is until it was blown up here. We have a Harris Profiteer, a human rogue. What I tried to do in building the deck was add at least one of each of the 4 to each of the guilds where it was possible. Though you'll see this somewhere we aren't. We have Lavinia, Angel Wizard. She is another one of our party payoffs actually. If we have a full party at the beginning of combat, she basically pacifies something until our next turn. We can also sacrifice her to give indestructible or lifelink, indestructible or hexproof. Very relevant ability. Next we have the Reflector Mage, bounce something, can't recast it on the next turn. Really powerful, particularly with us. If we can bounce a key piece, it can be game ending. We have Chief of the Edge, which is a small anthem for warriors. Natalie DeRise, she's a rogue, but she's also one of the commander payoffs. She's actually the head of the party time deck. So, we can look at the top card of our library at any time. We may cast rogue, wizard, warrior, or cleric spells on top of our library. At the beginning of combat on a turn, if we have a full party, we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control in the game, Death Touch. So you can see what we're going for here. This is a very simple deck. We're going for a critical mass of creatures that all get pumped if we can get the requirements. For clerics, we have Timna the Weaver, powerhouse card, doesn't need explaining. Then we have Aura of Skyclave. Basically, this is a reanimation for cleric cards. When they die, we can bring them back. Right, Demir. We have our rogue for Sig the Cutthroat. We have our cleric for Roan Sturmkeen. There's not a single creature that can flip him, but I found that his 3 mana enter, put a creature back on top of our deck, can be very good if we want to buy back one of our key creatures. Arwen the Rune Thief, I mean this was a given, he's the face of the Rogue's commander deck. And Grim the Corpspawn, because he's a zombie warrior. Again, we covered all 4 bases here. Pretty solid things. What we're trying to do is compensate, as I said, by having relatively good creatures that do something or keep going. So, Izzet Bandit is Nogel Bandit, is a rogue which can't be blocked unless someone has defender. Again, very solid creature. Jurian the Rune Diver. Whenever it casts a second spell, draw a card. We're looking again for incremental value of her. Ludwig is our wizard. That is another wizard here because there's not many warriors in Izzet colors. And our final wizard is Aetherhorn, sorcerer, just for cascade value, just to help us dig if we need to. But one thing I found in this deck is we do not run out of cards very regularly. Obviously we have the Niv reload to keep things going. Rakdos, we have our Rushblade commander. This gives all of our warriors haste. I like a quick victory, more time to celebrate. I like your style. We also have the Azra Oddmaker, really solid. At the beginning of combat we may discard a card and choose a creature. If we do, that creature deals damage, we draw 2 cards. A lot of our rogues are incidentally unblockable or evasive, so it's very easy for this to get through. We have Exalva, the Rakdos Blood Witch. We have a small 1/1 synergies with some of our cards, so her giving each of them haste is very solid. And apparently she's a cleric. A devil cleric? Maybe, but yeah. We have Grevin, the Predator Captain. He's the warrior I chose for this Phyrexian deck because I have a copy of him in paper and I've seen the powerhouse that he is when he actually gets to swing. So I want to keep... Yes, that's our warrior. Moving along, we have Zagdos, Thief of Hearts. This is a 6 mana 4/4 flying haste Death Touch that gives all of our other creatures Death Touch, but it also reduces its cost for each creature in our party. And finally we have Grenzo, the Dungeon Warden, because he's a very solid card. He's Rakdos and X, and he enters the battlefield with X1 counters on him, and we can pay 2 and put the bottom card of our library into our graveyard. But if it's a creature card, which is a huge portion of this deck, with power less than or equal to Grenzo's power, we can put it onto the battlefield. So we want to set this at about 4 or 5, ideally 6 to catch everything, but you know, we can drill value from the bottom of our deck. We have a Deathrite Shaman here. This is another one of our ramp creatures. We just put it in. I tried to find ramp creatures in the colours. We'll go over it when we come. Our rogue is Chevelle, the Bane of Monsters. Beginning of upkeep, we mark a creature. If we kill that creature, we gain 3 life and draw a card. We have the Grim Flare, Human Warrior, which it's a 2 mana 2/2 that lets us filter the top of our deck. We will never get Delirium I realised after playing this deck for a couple of times, because I forgot Delirium only counts your graveyard, so there's probably a better slot, so I'll have a look for some of the warriors, but we'll see how things look. I like the lower curve in this deck. Finally, Apatra is our cleric. Whenever she deals damage to a player, we put a 1/1 counter on a target creature. Whenever we put a 1/1 counter on a creature, we make a 1/1 Death Touch Snake. So, if we can sneak her in, we can take out 1 toughness creatures. We can also make Death Touches, which are good deterrents. All round, very solid. We have our Black Market Tycoon as our rogue. A very classy looking cat rogue. They can tap to create a treasure token, but it deals 2 damage and upkeep for every treasure we have at the end of turn. This deck does not pump out a lot of treasures. This is our sole treasure maker. We have Rada, the Heart of Killed, which is a mana dork warrior that can also add red when it attacks. I haven't found a use. Well, I have. You can pump that mana into Grenzo. That's the only way I've figured out how to use it. Then we have Rada's second incarnation that lets us play lands off the top of our deck as our next warrior. We then have the new card from Dominaria, General Marful Elves Dragon. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, it gets +3/+3 for each creature blocking it. Very good effect, particularly when a lot of our creatures are only little 2/2s. And with this deck being pretty basic as just no creature deck, we need ways to get safety when we smash in. And we have Rurik Far, the Ogre Warrior that deals 6 damage for every non-creature spell someone casts. Fortunately for us, he'll never do damage to us. Boros. We have a warrior with the Uncrop Captain, which is basically a combat trick when she attacks, pumping our team. We have the Kargan War Leader, which is an anthem for warriors again. We have Winota, because we have a good spread of human and non-human creatures here, and Winota can just swing the board state in our favour. I mean, we don't have anything busted like extra combat turns in this deck, but Winota just hitting 2 or 3 indestructible creatures can really turn the game. And finally we have Huffy Ghostforge in Boros. Spirit creatures you control have +1/+1 trample and haste. There's an interesting interaction I'll talk about when we get to there. Moving on to thing, we have Risa Redeemed as a token producer. We have our Asuryani Acolyte as our cleric that gives us Outlast to our creatures. Again, incidental stuff, we can just pump our team a little bit. We're just looking for any kind of way we can just, get more value out of this. Shara, Sisei's Legacy, keep calling her Shinara, like Terry Brooks books. Shinara, Sisei's Legacy. She is a basically super creature that gets bigger for each creature we control. Amazing when we hit our Phenona. And we have Zar Oten, Scion of Ifara. Whenever he attacks, we can put a 1/1 counter on each creature that's toughness less than the number of basic land types among lands we control. So, spoiler alert, that will always usually be 5 if we're casting him, so we will always be able to pump the small teams. Finally, for our Simic, our rogue, we have Ivy, Gleeful Spell Thief. We can use her to steal some spells off other people if they put some good spells we want to copy. We have Zimmetry, this is a Quandrix Prodigy. She's a good little thing that can drop extra lands or draw us cards in late game if we want to. Prime Speaker Vanifar, which is a powerhouse creature. Frilled Mystic is our 1 counter / Trixie spell. And Momia Vig as our final card in here. So, Momir is basically a shooter on a stick. If we cast a blue spell, we flip the top card of our library. If it's a creature, we put it into our hand. If we cast a green spell, we can shoot a creature and put it on top of our library. If the spell we cast is both blue and green, we can do both of these. So we can stack our deck and put the creature into our hand. So, obviously if we cast Niv, we get to put a creature into our hand. Beforehand, if we cast anything for, there's synergies. So we want to cast ideally our green spells with this, and since half our guild creatures are green and our mana dorks are green, we can always chain tutors with him, so he's very strong. So aside from that, we got 40 lands, a good spread of basics, Shockland, dual lands. I'll put the full list in the video below. And now we'll just have a quick talk about a fun interaction we found. So, Hoffrey Ghostforge whenever a creature we control dies, he exiles it, and then it creates a spirit copy of it with 1/1 trample and haste. But he creates a token, and this is the key thing. So with Reese, we can copy the creatures. So ideally, what we can do in a setup, which is a bit long-winded, but it's kind of like one of these fun multi-card combos you can pull off. We'll sort this by mana value so we can actually see the deck better. So, moving this here, and we'll explain. If we have Reese on the field, and we have a way to cast or tutor, what we can do is, if we can get Reese to die, so I'll put it in this way. The way I pulled it off in practice in my non-recorded game, using Prime Speaker Vanifar, we sacked creatures to chain our creatures. So we got, basically through a combination of sacking and damage, what we did was we sacked a free drop and got the Thundering Spark Mage, which then killed Vanifar, which then Hoffrey made a copy of Vanifar with haste that we kept, which then let us sack the Thunder Mage to grab another 5-drop. It didn't matter at the time. I think we grabbed Morian Vig. That let us then use the Thundering Spark Mage to kill another creature. And basically we set up a situation where we had a copy of Reese. I believe it was one of our mana dogs. It wasn't the Bloom Tender, because I was saying we basically had, yes, we have Reese, a Bird of Paradise, Ardent Electromancer, and our Thundering Spark Mage as clones. So Reese would pay 6 mana. He ended up making 2 birds, 2 Ardent Electromancers, and 2 Spark Mages. This ended up making enough mana with the full party, so we made 8 red and then 2 of white to activate Reese again. And since Reese was a clone, he made a copy of himself that stayed into play untapped, which let us go again and again and again. And we used the Spark Mages combined with the Vanifar to every turn another creature into a token to get more copies of it or more activations of it. So before our opponents graciously conceded, we had, I believe, like 10 Chief of the Edges, 20, 30 plus of each of these creatures, and dozens of Bird of Paradise, to the point where Ardent Spark Mages had literally rained fire down on the entire board, killed everything, and we were literally picking off our own tapped Birds of Paradises to cut back the token limit, so we could make more. And again, all of these had haste with Hoffrey Ghost Forge. So I don't have that in a recording yet, because it's long-winded, complicated, and hella weird. But it's fun to pull off. Even, as I said, even if you just... 9 times out of 10, what we won't pull off that though in my other testing games. What we will end up doing is having a board where we'll have, for example, a ton of incidental things, like we'll have Rada, we'll have, our Bandit, we'll have, where is he? We'll have Geist of St. Traft, or we'll have Meadow Witch, we'll have stuff that's not human, so we'll Vanifar, get Winota, and get going with Winota. But also, fair to point out here is, if we can get Squad Commander before the Winota, it's also great, because Core Warriors are not human, so they trigger the Winota, and if you have a full squad will give your attacking creatures indestructible, then your Winota will bring in more indestructible things. It's a very sick chain if we can pull it off. But yes, this is the new version of No Creature of Omri Niv. As I said, there's no synergy for Omri right now. I'm going to keep looking and building as we go, but this is the fun little, this is how the curve looks. Please see the list below. I'll have a gameplay video coming shortly.